Well, hello again, my friends. Welcome back to Carpo's channel. 15 minutes of free thinking, or whatever else I decide to call it that week. Reality check, or I had a whole variety of different ideas, but at any rate, today we're going to talk about assholes. No, not that kind of asshole. The metaphoric asshole that we encounter in our lives, that we all encounter in our lives consistently, and that we will continue to encounter the entire rest of our lives. And it's very hard to avoid that. You can move off into the boonies and avoid people altogether, but you're still going to run into people for the most part. You're going to have somebody coming through your land. It's just nearly impossible to escape dealing with people. And honestly, a low population of people themselves are actually assholes. But the ones that are assholes in their own way. So I'd like to talk about three different types. And why, first off, I think it's important to talk about this is because these people have to be called out. And it's a separate subject altogether that I'm going to do in a future video. But it's about public shaming and how it can work against us if we're overbearing and overprotective and we insult others. But honestly, calling people out for their BS is the only way that people will think twice before they act like an asshole. So the first type is the I'm right assholes, okay? Now these are the ones who, no matter what you say, they have to think that they're right. And this is vastly different from people who are right in a discussion. I mean, I've had several discussions where I know I was right about a subject, where I could look it up and reference it, but the other person continued to argue out of ignorance and refused to look at the information. That's a different story. But the type of I'm right asshole that I'm talking about here are the ones that know that they're full of shit, or know that they don't have the full picture. And this is no better presented than cable news. Those morning, afternoon, and evening cable news shows with the commentators who don't do any real journalism but just sit there on talking points. The Bill O'Reillys of the world. There's a couple of other ones. I can't really think of them offhand because I don't watch them. But there's from the left and the right. There are people screaming not to get to the answers, not to have a discussion or to try to understand how to better live our lives or improve the future, but rather to point the finger and get into basically over-talking, not letting people get their words in edgewise, what we basically see consistently out of our media. And it's very shameful. We've actually become so used to it that we accept it as the normal. It doesn't have to be that way, but it is. And what we do is, besides that, the over-talking is making small details, the trivial details, blowing them way out of proportion, finding one flaw in somebody's discussion and straw-manning it, and going on and on about something completely off topic or off subject, or trying to call somebody out for one thing they said, and verbatim trying to, pick apart and getting into semantics, not to get to answers, not to understand, but to be right. Those are some of the greatest assholes that we encounter. And unfortunately, they come first on my list because they are the ones who influence people the most. But it's not just media. It's what we see consistently in politics. In fact, it's interesting because there's game rules, okay? If you think of it, a lot of folks think of it as a game, a competition, right? Whether it be politics or a whole variety of other, competitive natured things, that we seem to have rules for games that we play. Football, baseball, basketball, they all have rules. And in the end, you shake hands and you walk away. And even though you're fully competitive with that team, you're there for the reason of winning, but you realize that they're not your enemy, they're your competition. We have made enemies out of each other, and the politicians have made enemies out of each other and then convinced the people to make enemies out of one another. And people have followed suit. So this is dangerous to a society. Propaganda is dangerous to a society, and the blame lies a lot with the people and what they believe. But at the same time, the assholes out there who perpetuate it, who knowingly say things that are bullshit and that are lies. And like I've said, I don't like liars, cheats, thieves, or abusers. So mainly the first one, or the I'm right assholes, are the ones that know better, but they talk shit anyway. that can be a little bit overwhelming in society. The second one I have on my list, the second type of asshole, are delusional assholes. Now, this is interesting because it's very similar to the I'm right asshole, except for the delusional assholes tend to think that they're greater than they are. And this one falls onto ego as a major component. And a lot of people are great at what they do. A lot of people are phenomenal musicians, great artists. They've started amazing businesses or discovered or invented some great contraption that helped mankind. That's great. But being great does not entitle you to special treatment or to assume you're better than other people. And this happens a lot. A good example would be, the ego on, I really shouldn't get into specific people, but Kanye West is a great example of this. He's delusional because he doesn't understand how other people view him. So he thinks he's great, and when people disagree with something that he's done, he gets all pissed at them and, makes it about them not understanding the artist. And a lot of artists become very arrogant in this way. And it can go both ways. The artists can be either very egotistical or extremely self-depreciating. And I know, because I'm an artist in my own way, and I can beat myself up over what I've created, or I can love it. But the difference is how you are perceived by other people. And knowing that, and being self-aware enough to see that other people think you're an asshole. Now, that's when you can decide you just don't care, or that you do care. And I choose to care. If people think I'm an asshole, I figure I'm doing something wrong. And a lot of folks will say, well, sometimes you just got to live your life, and if other people don't like it, screw them. I totally agree. But usually, if a lot of people hate you, then maybe there's something that you're doing wrong. And people refuse to budge on that because they're delusional about how much better it could be. But there's also the controversy aspect. And a lot of people, even in the I'm right assholes category, the first category, I should mention this. The reason why the people do this is simple. It's money. In the media, it's all about money. In politics, it's all about getting elected, and a lot of the times about money. And so people talk shit and say things that they don't believe and lie to one another to get ahead. And that is basically fraud, cheating, lying. I mean, people don't seem to think it's a bad thing. It seems to be the norm, that it's okay. And like I said about the games, we have the game standards, the game rules for the games that we play, sports, but we seem to think that it's open-ended for the games of people. So these assholes come out of the woodwork because they think that they're entitled, they think they're better than others. And the next one, which brings me, not only are the delusional assholes, they also include the bankers. This article I was reading, that was these interviews with these bankers after the 2008 crash, and they were saying how they had saved the day. They were talking about how great they were and how smart they were. And the thing is that these people said, it was just absurd. It was like two different bankers. And when they were asked whether or not, maybe it was the fact that you were bailed out, they'd say, no, it was my own smarts that got us out of this, completely unaware of the fact that you don't deserve $60 million a year. And in their minds, they believe that they're necessary. The bankers think that they're necessary. And in a society where we've made cards and banking necessary, sure, they're necessary, but they're replaceable. In other words, anybody can oversee money. It's not a very talented job, if you will. And no offense to any bank managers out there. I realize there's a lot to understanding the economy, but these days, mostly it's just management. It's the thing is, you're taking care of other people's money. You should be making a modest wage like everyone else. Why should a banker feel they're more entitled to more money merely because they deal with money? And people don't think about that. They just figure, well, they're bankers, they make money. And where do you think those millions of dollars in bonuses and paid vacations come from? They come from the people who use the banks. And since we're all forced to use the banks, we're forced to deal with these delusional assholes. And politicians are phenomenal at this, but I don't even need to say anything about that. I think we're all well aware. The third type of asshole that I'd like to talk about here are the abusive ones. Now, this can be physical or verbal. And many people don't realize how powerful verbal and mental abuse can be to people. the way that people will talk down on one another, the way that some husbands will talk down on their wives, and the way that some wives will talk down on their husbands, the way that kids and their parents will talk down on each other, the way friends will talk down on each other, the way that we disrespect each other. We're going to have moments like that, sure. But there are people who live their whole lives treating others like shit. And there's a condition, I can't recall what it is, but a lot of people, there's a name for it, but people treat others who are in, let's say, the cashier, the clerk, the teller, whoever you're dealing with, if they're in their place of work and they're serving you, there are some people who really abuse that and treat people like shit merely because even if they have a shittier job, it's just that they see somebody who has to serve them and they use that as a control factor. I mean, goddamn, for me, when I go to the store and I talk to the cashier, I want to make their day pleasant. I try to make them smile, I try to be a nice guy. But there are people who just take all their fucking aggression out on other people. And it's wrong. And it's bullshit. And it has to be called out, It's not just verbal with couples or with families, like I said. I mean, there's verbal abuse going on. The president of my country is verbally abusing people. It's become just totally acceptable to treat everybody else like shit. And those are the abusive assholes. Often they can't take the truth. This is a surefire sign for these people. Or criticism. There's a couple traits you'll find with abusive assholes. One, they are absolutely never wrong. Two, they'll rarely question themselves or say, well, maybe that's true. And they cannot take criticism at all. They'll turn it into a fight against you. It's kind of like when you're having a discussion with someone and it turns into a debate about a subject. And then the person takes it personally because you say, well, that's not true and that's bullshit. And the person, instead of hearing, well, the subject's bullshit, they hear, I'm bullshit. And then they take it personal. There's a whole line of psychology related to this, and I've studied it a lot as to why we can't have civil discussions in this world, because I like to be able to better my skills at interacting with people, and I like debating. I like arguing, but only for the sake of both smiling and saying, look, we gained something from this. We found out what was true. And that goes back to the I'm right assholes at the beginning that I mentioned, who perpetuate this idea in the media that, well, we're not sure about this, or this may or may not be true. The idea is a closed case of fact isn't news. It's not newsworthy. If news isn't exciting, then people won't watch it. And if people don't watch it, they don't make their money. And so the last thing about the abusive assholes is they tend to take their aggression out on others, and they tend to treat people, anybody they can, with total disrespect and disregard. And those people I won't put up with. If I see somebody treating another person like shit, I always speak up. And, sometimes maybe it's not my business, but then I step back and I think about it and I say, yes, it is my business. Just the way calling out people in the media or in politics is important. Some people would say, if you don't like it, then just shut up and ignore it. You can't. It's like I said, you're going to deal with these people the rest of your life. And we have to tell each other how we feel about people and what we consider values. So if enough people are saying, hey, this particular attitude trait is shitty and we don't like this, then the people will be growing up hopefully avoiding those traits. It's not like all these assholes ended up this way just because they wanted to be. And I'd like to say, I still have empathy for even the worst of them. I mean, I sometimes want to slap myself for having empathy for people that I absolutely find disgusting, hateful, abusive, but I see a glimmer of hope that they're trying to do something, Like I say, even the president. Sometimes I think, well, something good might come of this, and we can improve our world, improve our country, and improve everybody's outlook on life. But as long as there's assholes out there, it really makes it hard. Right before I made this video, another type of asshole popped into my head. That sounds totally wrong. And it was the burden. And I'm not going to go into too much detail on that, but I didn't really want to include that in the list of assholes because I reserve that word for people who are truly a major drain on other people and resources in society. That's what the society, or confuse others or lie to people. But the burden is the one that just doesn't do anything for themselves, and they make everybody take care of them. They refuse to do any actual insight or in-depth discussions to try to understand things, and yet they blame the whole world for everything. They play the victim card, but become a burden because they refuse to, not just in the way of like financially, but in the way that they treat their coworkers. Everybody's worked with somebody like that. The person who's always negative. It's a perfect example. The person who comes to work and they always have something bad to say about the boss or about the job site or the customers, and you're like, dude, I'm trying to live, trying to do my job and function here. So it's kind of the ones who hold back society, and I guess that the real burdens wouldn't even be the ones who are just not doing anything, but maybe the greatest burdens that we have are the I'm right assholes, the ones who are out there telling you like it is and pretending like the truth is something that can just be, shifted around to suit somebody's fancy. I look at politics as a big joke. I look at the media as a big joke, and it's shameful. No matter where I look, it's all about getting your attention. Flashy titles and clickbait and banner ads, and everybody wants your attention, and that's just the world we live in. And there are some people that are worthy of having your attention, but then there's everybody and their cousin and grandma, posting on Facebook for likes and trying to get recognized for really not doing anything, or just like we live in an interesting time where we can actually become famous just for being famous, like people that on like they're Kardashians or something. It's like, it's a strange time to be alive, but you could say that any time. I can't compare this to history. Everything has changed with social media, but the one thing that's remained consistent, there are still assholes out there that are a burden on you and me, and we deserve to say as much. So, if you're one of them, you're an asshole. Stop being an asshole. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. Thanks to my patrons on Patreon. Thanks to my subscribers. And hit the like button and the subscribe button and all that fun stuff for more great videos about assholes.